Alright, after a few sets, we finally got more Rezael support since it is the protagonist's deck, but this time a little bit more special because our protagonist of Divines finally has his own companion rearguard or his own partner. So yes, he did have his own main partner being Rezael, but he did not get his main rearguard companion until the deluxe arc. And here we go, we finally have his own companion rearguard, similar to basically Blaster Blade or Trickstar for Yu, which I'm definitely excited for because originally I thought Globelius is going to be the main companion rearguard, but considering how Globelius went, not really the companion rearguard anymore, and instead Akina found his new companion rearguard, and that's going to be the one that I expect to have more support in the future. And I do have to say, it's a cool way to expand Razio's support. Rather than focusing everything on a Vanguard, which they actually did that in the beginning, we now have a rearguard support that could be expanded upon now, which actually makes me kind of excited to do this deck. Which actually makes me kind of excited for this deck, especially the minute it went to Vita, and then we expanded further with now companion rearguard. Just overall some cool stuff, and overall the deck still kind of plays the same. I will admit, the deck itself basically hasn't really changed much, other than basically adding more tools to its arsenal. But of course, if restriction list ever hits, some changes of the lineup will change up, especially since this is right before the restriction is going to hit, and we'll just have to see by then. But for now, this is in July of 2025, showing what's before the restriction. But other than that, the deck still is very strong like usual, high power rearguard attacks, an angel that can resurrect or heal your allies from the drop zone, reminds me of Makath Malek in a way, which is actually partially why I kind of like the deck. It's a Archangel Knight that can basically revive stuff, and because I love Makath Malek, and this is very similar to Makath Malek, I kind of just end up playing the deck. And over time, it kind of expanded upon with more top decking triggers, which I kind of like as well. But anyway, onto the deck profile itself, with of course, the Ride deck. So the Ride line hasn't changed. We still use Soel, which we go to the grade 1, Vitessa, so when the grade 2 rides on top of it, you call it to rearguard and Soul Charge 1. Having that extra rearguard does help, and during your turn, it becomes 10k, which is also helpful for some numbers, but not completely necessary at the same time. Now this card, the grade 2, a Lancier, where when the grade 3 Razio rides on top of it, you can call grade 2 or less card from your drop zone, which is always pretty nice because it negates some pluses, and it also can trigger on place abilities, which I actually do sometimes. In which we go to the Fated One of Miracles, Rezael. So Razio has two skills, the first one being the main skill. When it attacks the Vanguard, you can counterblast 1, choose up to 2 cards that are different from each other and also different grades from each other with the total equal or less than your damage zone, and call them to rearguard. So basically, if you have 3 cards in the damage zone, you call a 2 and 1. If you have 4 cards in the damage zone, you cannot do a 2 and 2. You can still do a 2 and 1 or 3 and 1, basically as long as they're different grades and it's equal or less to your damage zone. That restriction can suck sometimes, especially since if you are at 2 damage, it could sometimes be a grade 2 and a grade 0. But basically, over time, this skill kind of gets stronger because once you're at 5 damage, you can go 3 and 2 for like full on 5 attacks. In the early game, you might not be able to get 5 attacks, but still pretty good because that's just a +2. And then the Divine skill, which depends on preference and timing. It's a Act, Soul Blast 1, shuffle all the critical triggers from your drop zone back to the deck. And then, throughout the rest of the game, one time of this skill, if you damage check a 6 damage trigger that is not a heal or over trigger, you can heal 1 damage. Basically, this is the name of the miracle where even if you die, something can come up. So if you damage a trigger for 6 damage, well, that can be treated as a heal trigger once, which is definitely useful, but it's of course RNG right here. But at certain timings, you might want to use this early game because it just depends on the matchup. Sure, sometimes you don't shuffle that many crits back, even the anime kind of shows it, but sometimes the risk is rewarding because if you have a low hand size, you might need it in the early game. Hence why you do want to ride this one in the Ride deck, and there's further reasons why you want to put this in the Ride deck as well. But in the late game, you can definitely shuffle all those triggers to increase your trigger rate in your deck as well, which is another thing that the anime showed as well. Yeah, the Divine skill is a bit flexible on how you use it. It just depends on timing and against the matchup. In which we continue off with 3 more copies of Razio, not for Persona Ride, but rather to basically make your Vita at full power. Because we go to Fated King of Miracles Razio Vita, where just like the other king, the Destined King, it's treated as the original Razio, and it gets plus 5k power for each copy of the original one in Soul, and it also inherits the Divine skill, which is of course pretty nice, but sometimes you will be using the Divine skill before you ride into this, and why you don't want to use this in the ride deck is mainly because of the second skill where you can sometimes miss timing, where on attack you can counterblast 1, once again choose 2 cards with different grades with equal or less to your damage zone, and call them to rearguard. Then additional, you can add a Razio to your Soul from hand, and Superior Call additional one, and then all the Superior Call units gets plus 5k. So basically, in timing wise, if you ride this first, you're not going to be able to do Divine Skill on your first grade 3 ride anyway if you need it, hence why you want to use the original one first anyway. And 2, the Superior Call part with the extra bonus usually doesn't happen too often in the early game, so it's just better you just turn 4 ride this. Now, the extra bonus of Superior Call being the 1 extra unit is not grade restricted, which is actually very nice, and the additional power to all those units along with it is also very huge, which of course makes the king a little better than the original Razio, but just do beware that you do need Razios in your hand to make this at full power. And another upside is that it gets power on its own in comparison to original Razio, because original Razio itself doesn't really get powers on its own, so this could be its own solo big attacker. And during turns, like in the later games, sometimes you won't have the resource to get the 3rd call. It's still not too bad because at that point, this could be a big solo attacker. So it's basically upgraded form with a little few tweaks and of course with extra bonuses. And then finally to the last grade 3, 2 Gobulius. You of course need to run Gobulius because it's the best Fated 1 Keter support, because on place you can Soul Blast 1 or top card deck to put it either to the top or bottom, but if you put in bottom, plus 5k. This is because Gobulius is the one that actually makes the miracle, in which the second skill is that on attack, while you have at least 4 damage, plus 5k, but you can counter blast 1, give it plus 10k instead, along with a drive check, which is very nice because now you have rearguard pressure with the drive check, which is always very huge. And of course, this is one of your main finisher targets as well, which is why you just must run this, but it's not until the late game, so that's why it's only 2 copies of, but as long as you see it, you're good enough. And so that's it for the grade 3 lineup. For the grade 2 lineup, so now to the new card, which is the new companion rearguard, the Refistor. So Refistor, I do expect to see more support in the future for this, especially Evolve form. On place on rearguard, you can counterblast 1 to look at top 7 cards of your deck for 1 Razio and add it to your hand, but if you miss, you can countercharge 1. Very nice that you can refund what you miss. But the second skill is the main skill of this card, where on attack, while your Vanguard is Razio, plus 5k, but if you have at least 4 damage, it plus 10k instead, and if it gets the plus 10k, if it's the 5th attack, it gives the guard restrict ability on Sentinels. So basically, this is now a full-on finisher for Razio, and yes, I have won some games with this. It doesn't really give you any draw power or anything, so that's why it's a 2 copy, but basically it's a finisher for the deck. And also, in a way, it can help you get your Vita at full power, which is another reason why this card is, of course, very helpful. I might bump this up to 3, just because I might want to search for the Vita, but it is personal preferences because most of the time you only do it for the guard restrict skill. But basically the new companion rearguard, so you just have to run it, and of course it's going to be very important in the future probably. And now to the rest of the grade 2s. So first up we got Nobia. Nobia is basically a more restrictive version of the Dual Nation one because your grade 3 Vanguard has to be Razio, and you can counterblast 1 to look at top 5 cards of your deck to call, and then put the rest of the bottom of the deck in any order. Don't really like the fact you can't shuffle, but it's here for some more superior calling if you need it, and it's a more budget option if you want to use this for Razio. But there's another reason why you can run this that is technically better, is for the second skill, because on attack, when it attacks at least a grade 3 unit, while your Vanguard is Razio, you can Soul Blast 1 and plus 10k. In some cases, you do want to Soul Blast those cards out, just so you have more call targets in the drop zone. And spoiler, you have a card that is going to put itself to Soul, that you want to Soul Blast out anyway, so it's also nice that it's a big beater that can superior call. And speaking of big beater, Nobiris, because Nobiris gets plus 10k when it's called by Razio skill, and also at the end of battle attack, you can Energy Blast 3 to put it to Soul to draw a card, and then after that look at top card deck to put it either at the top or bottom. So it does deck stacking, which is what the deck kind of wants to do anyway. In some cases, you can stack a top card with the trigger for the damage check, including the 6 damage heal. And it's also nice that it also draws and refunds Soul, which is also very helpful because this actually makes the deck without any Soul issues. And now to the grade 1 lineup. So first off, Aerial Sage. So it's the 15k booster for Razio, and you can discard a card from hand to give it a counter charge. Of course, counter charge is always very nice, but considering the deck uses a little more counterblast these days, 3 copies is actually a good number to run because you kind of want to see it as soon as you can. And discarding is also fine because you're just going to call from the drop zone anyway. So just seeing this as soon as you can is very helpful as well. And then to the new grade 1, Savrius. So I don't really see many people running this right now because of Saragon, but because of future reasons, I decided to run this, and I think it's a little bit better in Saragon depending on scenario, because when placed by the ability of your at least grade 3 Razio, you can Soul Blast 1, your whole front row gets those 5k, so extra power to the front row, which is actually going to make it very huge, and it could even be itself if you want to call it to the front row and then become a 13k attacker. That's something. But the second skill is that I think about this card boosts, and if it's placed during the ability of Razio during the turn, you can bind the card to draw a card. Basically, it's a new version of Saragon or Painkiller for the deck without needing to Soul Blast to draw, but it does bind itself, so you cannot recall this. But it does also power up your board, so it does have its uses. If for future reasons, if Saragon gets hit, this is going to get bumped up. And then there's 2 copies of Gregon, because if another unit is placed by card ability of your Vanguard with a Divine skill, it gets the skill into the end turn, so also plus 5k. So the skill it gets is that at the end of battle it boosts, you can retire to countercharge, just some additional countercharging if you need it. And I have used this skill quite often, not too often, but it's helpful if it's at the drop zone, because what thing you can do is call this and then call another unit, which will trigger its skill to give you the countercharge option, because sometimes you will need it. And then finally to Saragon, because Saragon is just too good in this deck. It retires itself to basically +1 from the top 2 cards of your deck. So no reason not to run this, but if it gets hit for the deck, then of course you could just run other stuff. And then finally to Cutlass. I see people not really running this, but personally I kind of like running this, even if it's just a 1 copy. But at the moment I'm running 2 just so I could see it, mainly because it's a good grade 0 target. It could also intercept from the back row, and on place it gives plus 5k, but if it's by ability, plus 10k, which could also fix some numbers. And I have actually used that skill a few times just to fix some numbers, just to make bigger attacks. So I do kind of like using this sometimes, but also being a grade 0 target, because in the early game you don't really have that many good targets, so just having a grade 0 target that you can always call through Razio is always nice. Now if you don't like running this, go ahead and run something else. And then finally 4 PGs, because PGs. And then for trigger lineup, OT, if I have the other OTs I would just run them, especially since this one kind of contradicts with Gobilius. 8 crits, 3 draws, because you still want to actually see your pieces, and if you do not draw them fast enough, it might make your field a bit lackluster of basically multi-attack. And 4 heals, 2 being counters. And so that's it for this deck profile on my updated Razio Vita deck. What do you guys think of it? What other cards would you recommend, and what other changes would you make? Personally, I've been liking the deck as it is. Even without Rafit Store, the deck was already running pretty well, and now they just gave us a companion rearguard, which now makes the deck kind of start to run out of space for certain cards, because there's just a lot of good cards when it comes to Razio, and I still like the deck as it is. But now with a companion rearguard, definitely a cool little expansion. But I am kind of expecting a new form of Razio eventually, because it's kind of weird that we do not have a new grade 3 ride deck for any of the Divines casts, because this is the time when usually when a whole new arc changes, they give you a completely new grade 3. But they didn't really do that. Instead, they gave us a new companion rearguard. So I'm expecting a huge expansion when it comes to that. And eventually, maybe a Fated Emperor Razio as well. But on that, there's really not much to say about this other than basically it still plays the same way. It's still fun. Just hopefully there is going to be cool new stuff happening in the future. But on that, that's it for this, and see you all next time.